Is democracy under threat in Europe? Welcome to this digital seminar at the Gothenburg Book Fair 2021, which is presented with the help of UNIC, the European Union National Institutes for Culture, which is a network of cultural institutes and other institutions from countries throughout Europe engaged in international cultural relations. The seminar's title question, is democracy under threat in Europe? Could of course be answered quickly with a yes or a no. We will try to develop the discussion a bit further, but at the same time try to narrow it down a bit and maybe widen it by discussing it not only in light of the rise of populism and other well-known ongoing political changes, but also in the shadow of the virus, the COVID pandemic and its cultural side effects. And in order to do this, we have gathered an extremely prominent and qualified panel of writers. And together they have received so many prizes and awards that the seminar would be well over before it had begun, if you were to mention them all. So I will make this introduction very brief. We have Kathrin Röggla from Austria, today living in Germany. She has written all kinds of prose works, fiction essays, but also plays. She's also working with multimedia, sound and images, teaches writing, and is, I guess, the vice president of the Akademie der Künste in Berlin. Aušra Kaziliūnaitė from Lithuania, an internationally acclaimed poet, and she also has a PhD in philosophy. Krystyna Dąbrowska from Poland, poet, writes essays, translates into English. And Alexandra Lucas Coelho from Portugal has a long, distinguished career as a journalist, mostly reporting about foreign affairs. And she has published a number of books, both non-fiction and novels. So the Gothenburg Book Fair is very happy to have you, if not in Gothenburg, and blame the pandemic for that. So in the panel of this digital seminar, my name is Per Svensson, and I'm a staff writer at the Swedish daily newspaper, Dagens Nyheter. So we'll start to ask, this pandemic, how has it affected you personally and professionally? And just feel free to grab the word. But we'll start with, I see Kathrin Röggla in my picture, so we'll start with you. And
okay, yeah.
Go on after that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Per. Yeah, the pandemic was a very difficult situation for us. On the one hand, for my personal writing situation, it was a canceling of all theater stagings, reading tours. I had to manage the situation. I have a family. I had to manage the situation very quickly to get jobs by writing and to manage it financially. We got in Germany a lot of fundings, state fundings, which is really luxury. As a vice president of the Academy of Arts, I had to talk for 1.5 years all the time about regularities, hygiene, regulation, the rules, what can we do, what can we not do. It was a time of waiting for decisions, threatening to institutions, threatening for the artists, musicians, theater actors, performers, writers. It was not easy, and I'm very happy when this is left behind. But on the other hand, I know that in the next year the financial funding will decline, and we have to expect a lot of bankruptcy and a lot of I think the art scene will be diminished and smaller and not poorer because of financial questions next year. Yeah, that's my personal and institutional experience.
And Krystyna, have you had the same problems, or one could imagine that it also could give writers time to write, as a sense of calmness, that you don't have to tour at all these book fairs and things like that?
Yeah, I have a bit different experience from like human perspective and psychological. Of course, it was very difficult time, but I am a poet and I am also a translator and freelancer. I don't have kids. So my daily routine really didn't change so much. And of course, one big difference is that I lost, all the invitations were cancelled, so it was also loss of money and so on. And of course, it was bad and financially hard, but I was not so much affected as other people in film, in theater. And I must say, I also gained some calm time for writing. And I was personally very lucky because I had quite a big commissions for translating. I was translating Louis Gluck, who got the Nobel Prize. So I was really busy with this. And it was very, very lucky situation. And I talked to many writers with Poland, and they had a bit similar impressions that, financially it's very hard. But the big difference is whether you have family, kids, and then it's really difficult to deal with all this online education and so on. If you don't, it's just much easier. And yeah, so it was not so dramatic.
And Aušra, how has your pandemic year been?
Yeah, actually, this new reality with pandemic and everything related with it struck me in Sweden last year in March, because I was invited actually together with Krystyna to participate in Litfest.
In Umeå, in the northern part of Sweden.
Yeah. And the thing was that before I had my poetry readings at Ronald's bookstore, amazing bookstore in Stockholm. And after we're supposed to go to Umeå to participate in Litfest events. But day before it was cancelled because of growing numbers of COVID-19 infections. So we just found ourselves, at some point stuck in Sweden, and I was very afraid that maybe I wouldn't go home, because my country Lithuania at that time just was one of the first European countries which decided just to close borders completely at very short notice. So it was kind of crazy time, and I remember I was very happy when I back home, because my options was maybe to stay on my friends' couches in Stockholm, and I had already my duties and things to do in Lithuania, and I wanted to back home. So I was happy to back to Vilnius, but also for me it was a very strange experience, because in Lithuania airport, after just departure, we just was locked in airplane maybe for 3 hours, and the thing was that it was a chaos happening in airport, in country in general. And it was kind of strange, because I was just the only one wearing mask in, airplane with many people, very crowded airplane. So I was kind of scary. And after I was talking about this experience on my social media, and the thing that shocked me the most was, reaction of people, because many people was kind of judgy, and they were talking, oh, so you went abroad, so you already knew all risks, so you are kind of should feel guilty or something for doing that. But the thing is that at that time, when I went for Litfest in Sweden, it was maybe 100 cases announced, and the situation changed very rapidly. But the thing is that, you know, is some kind of symbol, this reaction, that many people felt very scared and very afraid. So at the very beginning of pandemic in Lithuania, but I think not just in Lithuania, many people tried to find people, organizations, or someone in particular to blame for this. And at some point, I think it still continues till nowadays, and it's also, you know, very related with this crazy stuff, this growing numbers of people who believe in conspiracy theories and all this kind of stuff.
And Alexandra, should you give your experience?
Okay, thank you, Per. Well, like Krystyna was saying, I also don't have children, and of course, we are absolute privileged people here in Europe. I would answer maybe in 3 levels: the personal level, the national level, and then a global level. Well, on the personal level, I was in Brazil when everything closed, so I had to rush to Portugal, and then I completely changed my plans. I was writing a novel. I stopped writing that novel. Actually, I didn't want to write. I was unable to write. I wanted to live. I think I needed to live through what was happening and trying to understand what we're in the middle of. But then I've been a reporter a long time, but then I started to write books, and now today I'm mostly a writer. I write nonfiction, but mostly fiction now. But this pandemic brought me to the need of doing reportage again. I felt the need again because maybe we were completely unable to travel, because we were all in the middle of this, but at the same time we couldn't connect, we couldn't travel, we couldn't reach each other. So that brought me to the need, to the absolute need of doing reportage again. Which was also was something that I wasn't feeling. It's been a long time. So it happened that in August, so everything closed here in Portugal in March, and in August I decided to go to Lebanon. There was this huge explosion, of course. I think everybody saw it in the beginning of August, this huge explosion in the port of Beirut. And after years of not doing any coverage, I decided to fly to Lebanon, and I went to Lebanon. Lebanon was a subject of mine. I covered the Middle East many years. I was writing a novel related with Beirut also, but I wanted to cover it. I wanted to do reportage. So it was very important to me to just leave Europe in the middle of this pandemic and land in Beirut, which was just destroyed, partly destroyed by this explosion. And this really gives us a sense of, first, how we are privileged here in Europe. Even if I mean, I'm Portuguese, we don't have much fellowships, we don't have much funding. Of course, financially, it was terrible. Books don't sell. We can't. I mean, we have so few fundings for writers. Of course, it was difficult, but we are absolute privileged people here. And what I find absolutely striking in this pandemic is that as a journalist and then as a writer, I'm trying to deal also with the history of Europe and the history of my country, which was an empire, which inaugurated the slave traffic, which took 6 million of African people from Africa, which colonized Brazil, etc., etc. It's a long story, so I've been trying to deal with all this. And at the same time, I'm trying to deal with all that Europe keeps ignoring and thinking that there are us and then there are the others, but they are not the others. We are all we. And this pandemic, I think it was a very strong call, an opportunity for us to think and try to understand one more time here in Europe that we are not, I mean, we are not us and then the others. That doesn't exist. So if Europe doesn't try to understand, to learn something with this pandemic, and I mean, it's really, for me, it's just all these issues, of course, that are very strong to us as writers and as artists. When we start to think what is happening in Beirut, what is happening in Afghanistan, what is happening in India, when people just started to march in India because they were starving in the middle of the pandemic, when Palestinians cannot be vaccinated and Gaza is bombed, and what is the social distance in Gaza, when you have 2 million people imprisoned, and you have the so-called democracy in Israel vaccinating everyone, but Palestinians are dying. You know, so all this just leads me to this point. I mean, I cannot look at Europe as Europe and like our problems. Our problems are global problems, are world problems. And this pandemic, the first call for this pandemic for me, it's this one. If Europe doesn't try to learn something from this pandemic and continues to look at the world as, oh, we, Europe, with our, let's say, shared values and the others, then everything is like, it's like nothing can be done for Europe if Europe doesn't learn anything from this pandemic.
You're touching the central or key issue here is how this pandemic fit into the picture of a less democratic world. And I wonder, as in Europe, you have had a foretaste of authoritarianism, I would say, with closed borders and regulations, and the states having the right to turn it, to step into your private life to the extent that we are not used to. So I wonder, has this pandemic strengthened the forces that would like to see a less democratic Europe, or has it been the other way around, that people have gotten so tired and fed up with regulations and so on that we will see a renaissance in Europe for libertarianism, or a new longing for individualism and freedom, and a backlash for parties and regimes who would like to see a more closed and authoritarian Europe? In what direction do you think it will go? And feel free to grab the word, either of you.
Unfortunately, I think, well, I am sitting here in the Polish embassy in Sweden, but I have to say that my country, Poland, is like the very bad example of this kind of using the pandemic crisis to enforce authoritarian rule and to break democratic rules. And I think for me, it was the most stressful thing during the pandemic. I was not even so afraid of getting COVID, but I was afraid of what was happening politically. The main example was, maybe, I'm sure you've heard of a movement called Women's Strike. In Poland, like everywhere, probably there was this prohibition of big gatherings, and during the lockdown it was less than 5 people allowed to gather in public places. And during the same time, when the situation was really very bad and people were just afraid of getting ill and die and so on, Polish ruling party, Law and Justice, enforced this total abortion ban. Total, even if the embryo or child is severely ill, women would have no choice whether to keep the child or not. And this ban, this so-called law, provoked huge social rage and anger. and huge protests. I was also participating in them, and people were really afraid. It was not that people were thoughtless, but it was the only way to just say no publicly. And this is how this movement called Women's Strike was born. And it was not only women, just everybody. So for me, it's like the very telling example of what was happening. That I think in the countries with strong democracy, you can really be angry with the bad public health system and so on, but it's just the question of the pandemic. And in the countries where the democracy is unstable and it is under threat, you have to really, you are afraid of something else, of political manipulation, and you are afraid that this pandemic crisis will lead to something that is really much worse.
Yeah, obviously, this is the situation that the pandemic situation is used for political manipulation. In Germany, we have the problem that the critique of this is already used by the fascist people. So it's a gateway for conspiracy theories, and that makes it very difficult to criticize, to react, to say something. And we experienced the change of laws, new laws, hygienic laws, pandemic laws. They are to criticize, and they are not very democratic, but it's already used, already used by the right-wing people, by the fascists, not right-wing fascist people. Yeah, and this is the problem. On the other hand, we at the Academy of Arts, we are an international institution, and we founded an alliance of independent institutions, independent alliance of academies in Europe. And it was overwhelming that in this time, so much response, we got so much response. There is now a network of European academies, art academies, from Spain to Romania. And that was an overwhelming answer to this threat, to this situation of being separated, of being not able to talk to each other. And we did this via Zoom and partly meetings, and now it will change. It will be more a real meeting. But that was also a sign, a positive sign maybe, that we have this urge, this need to come together and to fight this situation.
As you said, you have seen in Germany this strange merger between, I would say, right wing and also have anti-Semitic tendencies among them, and protest against regulations.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Have there been some tendencies of that, for example, in other countries, in Lithuania, for example? Have you seen some kind of similar phenomenon there, Aušra?
Yes, actually, it's very sad to say it, but in Lithuania, very similar things happening now. And it's strange how this pandemic situation just, catalyzed all these marginalized movements from right wing, and now people who fighting against vaccines in Lithuania, have quite huge numbers of members, and they like to gather. And in Vilnius, for example, we had march, so-called for families or something like that. And a lot of very different people participated in this movement and still participating. But the thing that unites all of them are like very huge distress of government policies related with pandemic, and also they are kind of homophobic and also trying to ignore women's rights and all this kind of stuff. And in Lithuania now we have a lot of, like debates going about democracy in general, because many people from right wing and from, anti-vaccine movement, they talking that it's not democratic way to control a pandemic situation by pressing people to get vaccines and this kind of stuff. But I think that in general, one of the biggest threats to European democracy is this huge gap between capital cities and provinces. Between educated people and those who didn't had opportunity or need to go for the higher education. This is the main reason why, for example, Donald Trump was elected in the United States, but same problem exists in Europe too, in Lithuania. But I think not just in Lithuania, but in other European countries too, like conspiracy theories now are more popular than ever before. So this time is quite a unique opportunity just to watch these social changes. And to be honest, it's not easy to talk about shared values like European values and all this kind of stuff, because they are at a huge risk to be replaced by shared fears. And also these fears in Lithuania now are related with, this hate, fear, and some kind, very nationalistic tendencies, and trying to ignore problems. A lot of problems, for example, we had this huge problem now. We have a border with Belarus, and Belarus now pressing on Lithuania a lot of, some kind blames about how not democratic reaction is from Lithuania related with refugees, because we have this situation that some refugees went to Belarus, and now Belarus don't want them, so they are kind of trying to get to Lithuania or Poland, and these refugees just now are in between. They are not in Belarus, not in Lithuania, not in Poland. And the thing is that it's kind of crazy situation. For example, yesterday I also read one crazy article about how, military forces just don't let people to bring food for these people or warm clothes. And yes, so it's kind of, strange situation now in Lithuania too.
I would just add one thing, because it's a very, very dramatic situation with the refugees on the border between Belarus and Poland, and it's really for me something I cannot even think about it, because Polish government doesn't allow any help to these people, saying maybe even rightly that it's Lukashenko's problem and he pushes these people to our country. But the problem is that they are starving, and there are organizations there who want to help with food, with medicine, everything, and it's just, I don't know, less than 100 meters, and they cannot give this food, these medicines. They are forbidden. It's something from a nightmare. And these people, they can just die in a moment, because several of them are sick and and just there is no way for people who want to help to do this. And this is also, of course, somehow connected to the pandemic, because the politicians would say that, of course, now in this pandemic crisis, we cannot let the people in and so on. So it's another type of manipulation also.
Yeah, you're describing a more fearful and more closed Europe, and I would ask you, Alexandra, do you think that will reflect on literature as well, that we could in the future see a more inward-looking, more, if you more national rather than international kind of literature or literary scene as a lasting effect or lasting of this period of the pandemic and so on? What do you say, Alexandra?
Well, I really don't know how literature can react to what is happening, but for sure it will be reflected. It always happened. But I was very impressed with Krystyna and Aušra descriptions. I didn't know the situation on the border was like that. I feel a bit privileged also because, I mean, we have a socialist government in Portugal with all the critics that we can address it, and we also have this populist new party that is growing a lot, and there is this leader like with all these, you know, proto-fascist nostalgia of empire and nationalistic trends, etc. We have that, but it's really, I mean, it's not comparable to what is happening, and it's very impressive to me to listen to you, to Aušra and Krystyna. I covered a bit Eastern Europe after the fall of Soviet Union. First, I covered the fall of Soviet Union, and then a bit. I was in I don't know Lithuania, but I was in Poland, and I was so impressed, Krystyna. Do you think? And I can ask also Aušra that. Do you see in this new generation, and I'm thinking about people that are really young, I mean teenagers, these teenagers that goes to the streets to try to fight these climate changes, I mean all this which is very strong in this teenage generation. Do you see in teenagers and young adults right now in Lithuania and Poland, do you see this like a new generation for fight? Krystyna mentioned the women, but in general, do you see this? Do you see, like, because I feel that these very young generation in Brazil or in the Middle East, or even here in Portugal, I can see them, and they are very committed to this fight. Do you see that also there?
Yes. I mentioned the women in this women's strike, but the real phenomenon during this strike, this mass protests, were the really young people, like teenagers and students, and because they would go to the protests like in thousands. And this was also a literary phenomenon, because they had this big transparents with this, you know, slogans they invented, and they were so intelligent and brave and funny that literary scholars started to write them down and to analyze them, and it was really something. I mean, for me as a poet, something fascinating, because these young people, really young, they found their own language, you know, and for me, this is most important, to find the language which is really independent and original, and it changes also the way of thinking. So in the moments when I feel a bit really despaired, I also have this hope for the future with these young people, you know, I think what Aušra said is also very crucial, with this abyss between the educated people and the uneducated people. And what you say, Alexandra, about the privileged people, we also have this gap in Poland between cities and the province and the villages. So I think with the young generation, it can change. The only thing for me is that they have to really understand that it's so important, you know, the freedom and the openness, because sometimes I have the fear that apart from this really dramatic moments, they are a bit indifferent. They are like, okay, my personal life is important, but like the wider context is not so important for them. So it's the question if this force of like the social movement and protest will really carry on into the future and it will be strong enough.
You mean how to organize all these fights?
Yes, because it's also a problem in Poland that we are really good in protest and in going into the streets, but it doesn't translate into like the political, really strong political programs. You know, all the parties are, you know, they are in conflicts, and even the opposition is quite big, but it's weak because there are many quarrels, and it's the question of how to turn this social rage into something constructive, which can bring real change.
It's very interesting because when I think about all these young teenagers and young adults, also like in cities in the Middle East, like in 2019, I mean, hundreds of thousands of young people were on the streets to do a revolution, and the government, I mean, there was the fall of the government, but then the system keeps on going, and the country is collapsing. And I see this happening in Brazil also, in the streets of Brazil, in Middle East. You have all these young people, all this energy. And how can this energy be effective? That is really the question, because they are kind of outside the political system. They don't have trust in this political system. They want to change the system, but how? I mean, and most of the times they don't have and they don't believe in leaders. Also, these are collective movements.
So I think the time is running very fast. So I think we have to let Kathrin have a word before we round this up, because the time is running very fast. So I would just take it back to your profession, to literature. This very old question, Kathrin, of literature's function as a good or a neutral force. Could literature, to some extent, work as some kind of vaccine against anti-democratic tendencies, or is it just art for art's sake, so to speak? Could it play a constructive role in this post-pandemic and to some extent anti-democratic years that we are living in?
Of course, I think so. It's like a little bit a cliche to follow the path of enlightenment. I was impressed by Alexandra that she told us that she went to do some reportage in Lebanon. Maybe this is one possibility, to say, okay, I face reality, I go there, I write about it, I talk to these people. Another path would be to understand how political rhetorics are working, are functioning, and to work with this. And the third path is to organize ourselves as writers, not to be alone, to have a conversation like this. I learned a lot today. It was totally interesting for me, and I think this should go further, and we should do more, and we should meet us more again. It's so important to hear all the stories, and this is for the writing also very important, and not to be alone with some German story or some Austrian story or Lithuanian story. We are connected, we are transnational, we are our business is intercultural, in its heart.
And that's a very good ending. And it's unfortunate we have to end. I think we could have continued for a very, very long time, but I have to say thank you to Kathrin Röggla, Aušra Kaziliūnaitė, Krystyna Dąbrowska, and Alexandra Lucas Coelho. And I also say thank you to the institutions that made this seminar possible. The Cameos Institute and the Embassy of Portugal in Stockholm, the Embassy of Lithuania in Stockholm, the Embassy of Austria in Stockholm, and the Polish Institute also in Stockholm, and the Swedish Institute. So thank you all, and let the discussion continue. Thank you.